James Mathers at NAB 2018 for the Digital Cinema Society and New Bay Media. I'm here with Keith Vidger. We're in the Sony booth, and Sony has a brand new large format camera. Tell us about it, Keith.
Thanks so much, Jim. So, one of the biggest things for our booth this year is the Venice. It's new by about just a few months having shipped, and as Jim said, it's basically our first camera ever that basically has an imager that's not just 2/3 inch, not just Super 35, but full frame in size. So 36mm by 24mm. So it's the biggest imager we've ever made for a professional camera. It's also got the highest resolution of any camera we've ever made at this size. So 6K resolution, or about 24 megapixels in total. So the idea is we've got this huge imager, we've got this huge amount of resolution, and from that you can extract just about anything you want. The big kind of draw for most people is the idea that you would have anamorphic images. Of course, anamorphic is so popular for so long. Most of the cameras we made had a rectangular-shaped imager, and you end up cropping or throwing away so much of the image. The goal here was to make a more squarish, traditional 4-perf size imager that you can use for traditional 2x0 anamorphic lenses and make people happy. So that was one of the big things here. But rather than just stopping at a traditional 4-perf Super 35 square shape, they went again with the full frame, because then if you wanted 6K resolution, you could extract kind of a widescreen image from that, or you could do full frame 2.0 anamorphic and make 6K anamorphic images, things like that. So the idea is that just about any aspect ratio you could think of, you would be able to either natively use or extract from this big, gorgeous, dynamic imager.
What are my recording options with the Venice?
So two basic ideas. One, we can record RAW, based exactly on whatever size you want. So again, if it's 4-perf Super 35, you're recording just that. You're not recording a bunch of information that you ultimately have to throw away. So RAW would basically match the aspect ratio of anything that you choose to record in. But if you want to record as video as well, you can basically record, on S/S cards, everything from ProRes to XAVC to MPEG, all that kind of stuff. And of course, you can record both at the same time. Think of it as a proxy, think of it as a backup, whatever. But you can also think of it as, I want to record 4K RAW, and I record 4K video. Less of a proxy, but more of a backup, a kind of video clone, if you will. So we can do that as well as a recording option. So starting off with the new menu system, the goal was to make it super intuitive and also very easy to use. So a single push of the menu button gets us into all the common menus that you might want. For example, the project setting from, for example, in this case, we're in full frame 6K mode. We see the frame rate, all those kinds of things, and also our recording options. So we can go choose any of the different recording options that you were talking about before. And we could also have the ones for the S/S recording, independent and separate, of course.
Could you tell me about the sensitivity of the camera?
Great question. So the initial sensitivity when the Venice was released was a base ISO of 500. However, it was always our plan to move towards a base ISO, in addition to 500, of also 2500 ISO. So now we have a dual base ISO camera with 500 as one setting, 2500 as the other, and we have a EEI, or exposure index range, that basically is designed for each of those two base settings. Ideally, if you're shooting outside with plenty of light, 500 ISO is the choice for you. Inside, lighting's more challenging, that sort of thing. 2500 ISO is going to create these wonderfully clean, beautiful images without any kind of additional processing or gain or anything like that.
We've been doing 4K RAW for a while with the F55, so it's not new territory.
Exactly right. Started with the 65, the F65 to be precise, the 55, the 5. There's a lot of products now that do RAW. This has the exact same technology built into this camera. Well, we'll say the RAW recorder for this camera. So if you want to record RAW using the exact same codec as the 55 and all that, exactly the same. But since about 2 years ago now, we've been promoting a new format called XOCN, also 16-bit linear, gorgeous reproduction, but a more efficient, more modern codec, allowing you to have more recording time on a smaller space, or all the usual things, faster transfer times, offload times, that kind of thing.
Tell me about the lens mount.
So, like the 55, where we had this combination of a PL mount that is usable for just about every PL lens that's out there, but you could remove that and expose what was known as the FZ mount, and therefore a very shallow mount that you could put on virtually any adapter you could ever think of for almost any lens that exists in the world today. The same idea here, except instead of the FZ mount, which is sort of unique to that camera, now it's the E mount. So if you happen to have the bajillions of lenses that exist in the Sony E mount world, you want to put those onto the camera, that works too, but also the idea that any kind of adapter to go to any kind of lens that really exists in the world today, those adapters will exist and allow you to have that benefit. The key here is it's a super, super shallow mount, and as a result, allow you to put on, for lack of a better phrase, a hunk of metal that now gets you to those kind of lenses you might want to pair with.
What if I wanted to use my legacy Super 35 glass on this camera?
You probably, depending on the lens and just as importantly the focal length of any given lens, cover, we'll say most of it, but maybe not all. So a traditional Super 35 lens might not do everything. So we'll bring up an example. Sony makes a set of primes. There's 6 primes starting all the way from 20 all the way to 135. If you were to go to full frame mode and then start putting those lenses on the camera, you'll see that they're going to vignette because, again, they weren't meant to cover full frame. But as you go up in focal lengths and get to 85, it actually covers the entire imager in full frame mode. So it isn't just a simple answer, unfortunately, that a Super 35 lens probably isn't going to cover. In some cases, it will, in fact, cover the whole thing.
And can you window to use the older lenses?
Absolutely. So if you were to think of not only the goal of using older lenses, but also the idea that, I just want to do a 4K image. I'm producing for a customer that only needs traditional 4K or UHD, for example, then inherently you're windowing the imager and only using, we'll say, the center chunk per se. And that's true if you're doing everything from 4K to 4perf Super 35 and going up to anamorphic sizes. The only thing you wouldn't window, of course, is the native full frame imager itself.
I've heard about an optical ND system with this. Can you tell us about that?
So one of the things that people liked best about the F55 and the 65 before it was the built-in ND glass, actual glass filters. But like always, people want more. So we had essentially 4 ND stops on the 65, 2 on the 55. This has 8 ND filters, actual glass filters built in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And it's also remote controllable. So in the future with apps and remote wireless controls or wired controls, you'll be able to select any one of those neutral density filters to go in. And all the usual things, no fingerprints on it, super high quality glass, all that kind of stuff, all basically IR protected. So the idea is that you've got the flexibility to select all these different filters at the touch basically of a button or just doing it right on the outside of the camera.
A lot of great options. Thank you, Keith.
Thanks so much, Jim.